I camped where a person vanished without leaving footprints, and the forest asked me a question I still can't answer. 3 steps from the tent stake. Every compass on my team spun in quiet circles, as if the mountain disliked straight lines. Someone had zipped the world shut from the inside. And the zipper was made of trees, which is similar. I thought I believed in maps. Then I found a stream carrying a device that swore it had crossed miles in the span of a breath. If you listen long enough in that hollow, the silence begins to sort itself into shapes. And one of them wears your name. I was not sent to solve anything. I told myself that when I parked below the ridge and shouldered my pack, that I had come only to learn the shape of a story and walk it until it ended. In certain places, ending is a rumor. By the time I reached the old spur where the trail kinks toward the border, clouds ran shoulder to shoulder with the spruces, and the ridge kept stepping away like a host who will not let you reach the door. I had studied the file for a week, folding the corners until the paper behaved like cloth, telling myself that if I memorized every measured detail, the place would have the courtesy to behave. It did not. The hollow held a poise I recognized from rooms in which something important has already happened and refuses to be reenacted for visitors. I moved around the clearing the way a careful reader moves through a poem, not looking for answers so much as for the place where a question is hiding. The fire ring was clean, a soft oval of ash the color of pencil rubbings. The cookset lay nested, dry and bright. A length of cord still ran from a branch to a stake, a patient line that no longer held any weight. I said her name, low enough that it would not sound like a claim. Sarah Chen. Some names sit in a place as if they belong there. Others float as if waiting to be admitted. Her name hovered, undecided. The tent was still zipped shut, stakes driven securely into the ground, rainfly properly attached. Inside, a sleeping bag lay, neatly arranged. I pictured the sequence. Stove, food, notes, zipper, darkness, nothing. The sequence refused to add up. The first thing that refuses to cooperate in such cases is time, not the hour on a device, but the texture of sequence. I traced the circle of ordinary acts a hiker performs before lying down. Check the weather, tidy the line, lay out light and food for morning, write a sentence that says, I was here and I will be there. The axe should have left a groove, an arrow pointing somewhere. Instead, I found stillness carved into stillness. The grammar of a paragraph with its verb removed. The hiker's backpack sat upright against the tent wall, every compartment still properly secured and organized. Food supplies remained untouched, including a half-eaten energy bar that had been carefully rewrapped and placed back in its designated pocket. I stood where a foot should have smudged the duff, and there was only order. Her name felt like a match I was trying to protect in wind. She was not a tourist gambling with grandeur. She knew these grades, these switchbacks, the tunnels of rhododendron that force you to remember your knees. She had filed her route. She had friends who could recite the waypoints the way families recite recipes. She treated these hills like colleagues, not like a dare. Water bottles were full, purification tablets accounted for, first aid kit complete and unused. The file described someone who loved contingencies. The clearing answered by removing the only one that mattered. I wrote in my notebook, if a place can keep a person, does it prefer the careful to the careless? The thought embarrassed me when I saw it on the page. Places do not prefer, and people do. But people lean toward patterns and then mistake the leaning for proof. I tossed a small cone into the center of the tent pad and immediately felt childish, as if I had spoken out of turn in a room built for patient work. The hiker's journal lay open to an entry dated the previous evening, the handwriting neat and unhurried, describing a peaceful day of hiking in anticipation for reaching the next shelter. The journal entry ended mid-sentence, not with a sudden scrawl suggesting surprise or panic. I remembered an instructor once said that silence is a kind of punctuation. Here, silence kept retyping itself until all the letters disappeared. Night on this ridge does not lower so much as it accumulates, a steady layering that convinces you morning is gossip from the valleys. I did not sleep at the site. I pitched down trail where the spruces thinned and the ground opened like a held breath. I wrote until the pencil began to complain, then set the notebook aside and listened to a quiet that had edges. Below, water negotiated with stones. Above, nothing negotiated with anything at all. I thought about the difference between uncertainty and refusal. Uncertainty waits for you to ask better questions. Refusal folds its arms and moves the doorframe 2 inches to the left every time you blink. At first light I returned and read the official record aloud, as if the trees might object and teach me something by the manner of their objection. Reports do not allow astonishment, so they smuggle it into the angle of an observation. A ranger had written with courtly restraint that the site was impossibly pristine. Another line noted the pattern of dust on enameled steel, as if dust could provide testimony. I am not a believer in the supernatural. I believe in what despair can do to a compass needle, in what hope can do to a witness statement, yet the record here behaved like a window that refused to show weather. The search dogs would circle the campsite repeatedly, but refused to follow any scent trail beyond a roughly 20-foot radius. I pictured nose after trained nose, inscribing a boundary and then sitting inside it with the gentle shame of a creature that knows the answer and is not permitted to say it. The maintenance worker who found the device met me in a shed that smelled like oil and cedar. He drew a map on the back of his inventory sheet and marked the notch in the log with a little square. The stepping stones with a pair of parentheses. He told me he liked streams because they keep their word. Then he admitted he had crossed that place twice on the same day before he saw the thing wedged under the wood. The confession sat between us like a strange tool neither of us knew how to pick up. He was cheerful, in the way of someone telling themselves they still believe in reasons. I asked for permission to spend a night exactly where the tent had been. The permit arrived with a note that did not use the word warning. Local guides had stopped using the hollow. Not a ban, not a policy, just a habit that had taken on the plain dignity of a rule. People invent rituals when they notice a pattern they cannot prove. I am not romantic about fear. I think fear is often a failure of imagination. That night, standing in the doorway of the borrowed tent, I felt something that did not belong to any category I teach my students to handle. Not dread, not awe, something like a hand on the shoulder from a person who will not tell you their name. I read the section of the file describing the device again. The official phrasing called it an impossibility with numbers attached. But numbers can be decorative when they have nothing left to govern. The device left the tent and reached the stream in a span no stride can honor. Later, it presented itself without damage. Seals intact, battery still living on a charge that should have been a ghost. The worst part was not the endurance. The worst part was the creation of files that had not existed when the device was first examined. Files that proposed coordinates scattered like seeds across ranges Sarah had not walked. Some reachable only by machines, others only by hands that believe rock is a ladder. If a joke was being played with Sol, it was a joke written for the amusement of geography. Her family met me in a diner with a trout painted above the counter and a fan that insisted on a slow waltz. They were kind in the way people become when kindness is the only tool left that does not cut the hand that uses it. They laid out postcards from earlier trips, notes she used to slide under their door after long weekends. A photograph where she wore a red cap and a rain jacket bright as citrus. Grief had taught them a vocabulary generous enough to hold two correct answers at once. Their daughter was gone. and a part of the world had been edited without permission. We talked about recipes. We talked about small, unglamorous habits like putting away a stove before you sit down to write. We did not talk about hope, not because we lacked it, but because hope here had the shape of a trap left on a trail. Back on the ridge, the weather turned surgical. The world was a clean table, and the mountains did not indulge metaphors. I carried flagging tape and refused to use it. I wanted the place to decide my route. The border path behaves like a coin that cannot decide how it prefers to be held. On one side, it pulls your eyes across miles. On the other, it tightens you into green logic until even your thinking grows moss. I counted steps without meaning to. The way you count to delay saying the thing you do not want to say. Forensic analysis revealed that nothing had been moved or rearranged after Chen's disappearance. Dust patterns on her equipment matched exactly with how items would settle after days of undisturbed use. The phrases read like handwriting that keeps itself neat out of respect for someone sitting in the next room. I tried an exercise I have used for years. Choose a landmark, a spruce with a lightning scar, and walk to it at a measured pace without letting the clearing leave your peripheral vision. Then walk back along your own footprints. The return was longer every time. Someone will tell me the grade tricked me, or my mind had already leaned towards strangeness. Perhaps. But fatigue is an old acquaintance. This was not that. This was distance performing courtesy and then reneging. You can tell when courtesy is performance by how quickly it tires. There are always stories. A ridge runner told me about a cave where wind insists on the wrong direction. A hunter said his name had been spoken in a voice that matched his own. An amateur radio operator showed me a printout of a signal that arrived before it was sent. I present none of these as evidence. I offer them as the human answer to rooms that refuse us as essential. This wasn't a case of someone wandering off the trail or succumbing to exposure. This was something far more unsettling. The weather had been mild and clear. The surrounding area showed no footprints leading away from the campsite. You can feel when a conclusion is a placeholder. Placeholders are useful. They keep the chair warm. But a warm chair is not a person returning through the door. I slept again below the site and dreamed without images. The dream was a texture, a fabric that did not want to be stretched across a frame. I woke with an apology in my mouth and wrote it down without addressing it to anyone. I brewed water and watched steam behave itself. I made a list of untruths we had discarded: panic, storm, animal, malice arranged to impress colleagues. The list did not produce comfort. It produced a kind of quiet that suggested I was now describing the negative space of the thing instead of the thing. I try not to mythologize the dead or the missing. It bleaches detail and comforts the teller while doing little for the told. There is, however, a weight the living inherit from a place like this. A pressure that sits in the chest and leans very slightly downhill. I packed to leave and found that I could not. The clearing felt like a library in which one book had been filed beneath the radiator. Not lost, exactly, but made to obey a catalogue in another building. I walked the circle the dogs had drawn, toe to heel, reading the ground as if it belonged to a language I had once spoken fluently. When I looked up, the mountains had the decency to tell their usual truths. You are small, you will leave, you do not get to hold what refuses to be held. I have a theory I do not plan to publish because readers who like their furniture fixed will mistake it for superstition. The theory is small. Certain rooms of the earth are unlit hallways between kinds of accounting. We keep ledgers for air and ledgers for stone, as if breath and mica obey separate charters. Now and then the offices share a wall that looks like trees, but if you stand too near, a clerk in the neighboring ledger amends your entry and forgets to tell your side. The numbers still add, but they add to a different book. A person goes to sleep owning their name and wakes in a geometry that has revised the idea of ownership. Before I left, I wrote to the family with the only firm sentences I could justify. Their daughter had not been careless. Nothing in the arrangement of her final camp suggested panic or despair. Those who search often fail for human reasons. But this failure wore a different face. Places, like people, have temperaments. This place resists a certain kind of return. I do not know whether the letter comforted them. Comfort may be the wrong metric here, like weighing a shadow to learn how tall a person is. The right metric might be whether the world still allows their daughter's name to perform every function a name is built for. On the way down, I met two hikers resting on a boulder. They asked whether the hollow ahead was worth a night. I answered with care. "It is beautiful," I said. "It will make you check your laces and your reasons. If you camp there, leave no open questions on your table." They turned their packs toward the road without making a ceremony of it. Sometimes the bravest proof you can offer that you love your life is to turn around while it is still yours. I copied into my notebook the sentences that refused to change under any light. The case officially remains open, though active investigation ceased after 18 months when every lead had been exhausted and every theory had been debunked by physical evidence. Chen's family maintains a reward fund for information leading to her discovery, but the notices now hang in mountain towns like memorial flags for the living. The hollow has already been reclaimed by green. The tent pad softened into the usual grammar of leaf and loam. If you pass through, you may find your pace quicken for reasons that have nothing to do with schedules. You may feel, as I felt, that questions here are tolls and that answers, if they exist, are collected elsewhere. I left by the long switchbacks, counting breath to measure distance. At the second to last turn, I faced the slope and did not ask for anything. I did not offer anything. I allowed the place to be fully itself and allowed myself to be a visitor who does not require a souvenir. Then the car accepted me. On the drive, stations returned to their ordinary conversations and the map remembered what its lines were for. That night, far from the ridge, I woke to the particular quiet of my own room and listened long enough to realize something I had not dared to say in the hollow. Some doors do not open or close, Val. They are thresholds that never stop being thresholds. We live most of our days safely on one side because we are not interesting to the other. And if the ridge ever looks at you and decides you are interesting, make your reasons plain and your farewells immediate. There are places that keep their secrets. There are places that keep their guests. When I put my notebook away, I did not write the end. I wrote, simply, "Not mine," to close. Story number 2.